Welcome, everyone. Great to have you here. With us today, we have Michael. He's a sales leader with over 30 years of experience, including 20 years in sales leadership roles. He has built and managed sales teams and strategies for all sides of organizations, from startups to tech giants. Mike is an authentic leader and has closed over 1,000 transactions, generating over 150 million in revenues. Welcome, Mike. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Karen. It's great to be here. I appreciate it.
Right. So this is basically we talk about go to market and all things related to go to market out here. Right. So can you share a little bit about your journey in sales and how you finally decided to, choose the fractional VP role?
Sure. So I started in B2B sales 35 years ago, which is for most of the people I think on the call means that I've been doing this longer than most of the people on the call have been with us. Um, and that just it makes me the oldest person on every call. But I started in at a time where there was no automation, right? It was everything was manual, landlines, no cell phones, but we were oriented to KPIs, right? And that was really central to how we ran our business. That was working for EDP, big payroll HR company. I moved from that into tech sales because I realized that my friends were moving to these startup companies like Oracle and PeopleSoft, to give you an idea of how long ago this was. And they were doing the same job, but they were making 3 times the money. So I kind of, the light went off. I said, I should probably go do that. So I moved into tech sales, and that was very fortuitous because it opened the door to moving into what was called technology-enabled selling, which became Salesforce automation, which became CRM. So I was early stage in that and saw the evolution that was going to happen with automating sales organizations, marketing organizations, much in the same way we'd already done finance, HR, supply chain, things like that. During my time at ADP, I had started in a management role and realized I wasn't ready for it. Mm-hmm. I had been in sales for a number of years at that point, but I've been in corporate sales for about 2.5 or 3 years, and I just didn't know enough. Okay. So I stepped out of management and focused on individual contributor, and I did that for about another 10 years because I really wanted to know how to sell. So when I moved out of individual contributor and into my first real sales management role, I felt like I had a little something to offer and could also associate well with individual contributors, and I think I still do. So, and then over time, I've been sales director, I've been a VP of sales, I've been a CRO, and there's similarities to the role, but ultimately getting to the fractional part was I worked for a wonderful company for a number of years. We got acquired by a private equity firm, and I had a plan. It's always good to have a plan. I had a plan that after the next event, I kind of calculated my age and finances and said, oh, I'll be ready to move into semi-retirement. I'll go do fractional work. And that got accelerated a little bit more than a year ago when I was deemed redundant, saw it coming. It was all good. We parted as friends. And I launched my fractional business the day after my last day at that company. So it was some kind of planned, just not planned for when it happened. And here we are 15 months later.
Yeah, no, Mike, there are two things, right? One, you said I'm older than most people. Well, I would say you're more experienced than most people.
Thank you.
Second thing, on the plan thing, I recently watched this movie, King Richard. This is the Williams sisters and their father. And, he had this line saying, hey, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
Right.
So to your point on having a plan, I think, people should realize that. But coming to what you have had, right? Like what we are more interested in here is talk to us about your playbooks, like 0 to 1, 1 to 10. How do you go about that? What are your playbooks? What are your learnings? Like just walk us through that.
Yeah. So I've thought about this quite a bit over the last few days, thinking about this session. And there are some things that I think that are central themes in the playbooks, but it's important to have to be open to adapting the playbook in different places based on where the company is in its life cycle, based on industry vertical, all that. It matters. And I think the mistake that gets made both as a leader and in hiring is hiring somebody for a playbook, right? It would be like, in the world of professional sports, if I took a coach and said, well, I'm going to hire this coach because he's been so successful or she's been so successful at this team, and think that they're going to put the exact same playbook in place, even though it's different people. It's like so it doesn't quite work. In the 0 to 1, there's some things that I've seen, learned, been part of. I'm part of one right now. I think that things that are important from a playbook standpoint is the founder has to be involved in sales. Has to be. And when I see or hear of founders that want to hire in the 0 to 1, especially that want to hire a full-time CRO or a full-time head of sales, I think that's a mistake, because you need to know unfiltered from your prospects, customers, partners, where they're being successful with the product or not, why they're buying, why they're not buying, things like that. Your sales person or salespeople at 0 to 1 are generally a different DNA than 1 to 10 or 10 to 50. Mm-hmm. So like the 0 to 1 salesperson is like almost a mercenary salesperson. Their job is to get you new clients. You don't want them to do anything that's not ethically or morally inappropriate. But they are people who are going to prospect and close business, right? And give and give honest feedback. So the playbook is really, at that point, it's if you're familiar with Bruce Cleveland's book, Traversing the Traction Gap, you're really looking at understanding your minimum viable product, minimum viable market, going to scale, and constantly tuning the message, the process to determine what works for you, for that segment and for that part of your growth curve. And you may find that the business and even the product will change entirely from 0 to 1 and then 1 to 10.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's between 0 to 1 and 1 to 10. Like, what changes? So first thing is 0 to 1, you said founder-driven sales. Yep. We did our first million. It was founder-driven sales. So you're absolutely right, at least from our perspective, right? And like, the moment you go from 0 to 1 to 1 to 10.
So 1 to 10 is when process starts. So it once you've built some repeatability and you understand who your customers are, why they're your customers, now it's time to really implement a sales process that starts with the MQL. Works MQL through to close and then post sale, to be measuring along the way, so that to have KPIs and understand what those KPIs are telling you. But I would also caution, because I know everybody it talks about being data driven. Use the KPIs and the data to tell you where to look. So in that 1 to 10, it's important to take the data and go back into the sales situations, to the salespeople, and to the customers to validate what you think the data is telling you.
Sure.
So that you can continue to iterate, modify that process.
Right.
You have to also be, as you go further north of 1 million and you get closer to 10 million, you have to become more attentive to qualification, because you don't want to get yourself into situations where deals aren't qualified and you're losing cycle time to unqualified prospects.
Can you give us an example of from your work for the playbooks, and you don't need to name the clients if there's confidentiality, but how does this work in real life? Like, what are the things you've done? Actual examples.
So in a couple of cases, what I've done, so coming in as a fractional leader, the operation already exists, is assessing the pipeline, just for starters. Because what you hear continually is, I don't have enough pipeline, or I don't have enough pipeline. And what I find is that the problem may not be pipeline, it may be pipeline efficiency. So going in, applying real rigor to qualification and discovery can get you a much different result.
Yeah.
At the back end. It goes to the very beginning of the process to outbounding and MQLs, where we've seen cadences that are only three steps or 4 steps, not 10 or 12, which is really what it takes for most outbound. Or even that the emails are really long, or they don't discuss the problem that we solve. So part of the playbook is to review the content.
Yeah.
As an outsider, if this email came to me as an executive, would I open it?
Right.
Would I respond to it? And what we find when we kind of change the filter and look at it that way is that a lot of the communications aren't very good, and they have to be redone.
That's a brilliant point, right? Like that's what. So ICP, you talked about qualifying. We call it like ideal customer profile. How do you know that, right? You talked about after ICP, you said content, and exactly what you just said, which is like, hey, if I get this email, will I open it? Now, here I have a question, right, for you, which is different people are at different levels, right? So how does an SDR who's, let's say, 2 years out of college or like 3 years out of college start thinking like a CRO? Like, hey, I'm writing this email. Would they open it or not? Your perspective will be very different from this guy's perspective. So how do you bridge that gap?
So one of my associates and I have just done a training for one of my clients on using generative AI in the sales process, right?
Right.
So and he's same experience as me, right? So take 2 guys with 70 years of sales experience and apply modern technology to it and see what happens. So you can think like a CRO using generative AI. So if I write an email and then put it into ChatGPT and say, write this in the voice of a CRO,
Right.
it will do that. And then if I want to shorten it, say, write it in bullet points. I can generate an email very, very quickly, or a communication very, very quickly,
Right.
that will be more authoritative or be written more clearly, because really that's what when you're communicating with an executive, clarity is key.
Right. But here's the thing, right? Like this is very interesting now. Now, what you just said makes so much sense. Which is like go to like ChatGPT, you have Gen AI at your disposal, right? Use it.
Yep.
And if everyone starts using it, if I'm the buyer, I get 20, 30 emails a day, all of them very well written, polished.
Yeah.
And for most of them, I can even make out they're from GPT because of the language which is used out there. Right. So how do I stand out?
Because I love that. You can use ChatGPT or use AI as a guide. What I'm not suggesting is you take what it gave you and copy, print, and put that into your email. You still have to review it and put it into your voice or your company's voice.
Right.
It still has to be personalized. And I think that's another thing that's missing, and part of my playbook is you have to personalize. Mm-hmm. I've written about this, hyperlocalization. If I'm going to be communicating with you in California, I want first meeting we've ever had, I want to take at least a minute and try to figure out where in California you are and what might be pertinent or relevant to you in California right now.
Right. Great. So and how do you personalize? Like, any recommendations to budding folks? Like, what are some of the levers you can use for personalization? You said like California geography being one.
So another one of my friends, Steve Richard. We've known each other for years. He founded a company called Exec Vision, now MediaFly, and he teaches something called 3x3 research. So 3 facts in 3 minutes. It's all it takes. So you can go to LinkedIn and Google and get it. Also, by the way, if you have a CRM system, check your CRM system, see if you've ever spoken to the person or the company before, and like you're like another SDR, whatever. But you can get just three quick pieces of information about the person. Like, I know you worked at Pepsi.
Yeah.
So you know about sales and marketing because you worked at Pepsi a long time ago. That would not have been an easy job.
Right.
So things like that become important because, and again, part of the playbook, we're humans selling to humans. Mm-hmm. It's not Mike Muhlfelder selling to Sprouts. It's Mike Muhlfelder selling to Karen. You have your own set of goals, needs, and objectives. And that's when we talk about personalization, when I talk about it, that's what I'm talking about.
Beautiful. Now, this makes so much sense. I think the 3x3 rule, 3 facts in 3 minutes. And also, you're selling to the person on the other side. So, doing more research on them, right? Yeah.
And by the way, that's true. People, and I know this is one of the things with SDRs, BDRs, 2 years out of school, I'm not really comfortable, selling to a CRO or CEO or CFO. But then when you humanize it and you realize that the person that you're selling to is probably about the same age as your parents, they have the same issues in their personal life that everybody else does, and meet them at the human level. It doesn't matter that you're 22 and they're 52.
Right.
Again, it's a human selling to a human.
Yep, makes sense. And what are, Mike, some of the market tools you like use and you swear by, and why?
I'm anybody who follows me, and I am the only Mike Muhlfelder in the world, by the way, at least the only one that's in any type of a corporate situation. There's one guy in Germany who still has the umlaut over the U. Don't ask me why I know this stuff, but I do. So I'm very easy to find. I'm also very active on LinkedIn. So that's from a marketing standpoint for me as it relates to my business, ComMotion Sales, my personal brand. That's important to me. And by the way, I keep that very separate from anything else that I do social feed. But that is the place where business and brand happens. If you're doing anything at scale, you need something that will help you manage your email cadences, your outbound cadences, whether that's Ample Market or Sales Loft or Outreach, whatever it is. Yes, you need a CRM tool, whether that's HubSpot or Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics. I mean, I have my preferences, but I don't favor necessarily one over the other. And at the early stage, it may just be simple, something simple, and that's fine. But you need something to track who you're talking to, the company, the person, your process, stage and process, things like that. So those are the things that I think are critical in your stack. And then again, now as you go from 0 to 1 and then 1 to 10, and you start to scale, and we learned this when I was at Jitterbit during the pandemic, is that you have to keep an eye on your tech stack, because it will get bloated very, very quickly. By the way, this is one of the things happening in corporate sales now, is that procurement has stepped in a very strategic role and in a controlling role, because they're managing the tech stack. So if you're selling a solution, be mindful of the fact that a business is looking at replacement. If I buy this, what am I taking out of the tech stack? Like I said, and otherwise you end up with I got a $10,000 solution here and a $20,000 solution here, and lots of redundancies, and it gets very expensive, and that impacts you with your go to scale. It impacts your LTV to CAC ratios, EBITDA, all that stuff. So,
right. And by the way, right, so shameless plug here. We are also a go to market platform. So next time, give it a shot, because some of the stuff you mentioned around Ample Market, outreach, those things, our goal is to consolidate a lot of those tools into detool the organization and make it more efficient, right? So that we agree with you. And then, what we've seen, at least for 0 to 1, 1 to 10, HubSpot is the more economical version, right? And then as people scale, they seem to move over to Salesforce. That's one thing we have seen.
I agree with you, and I think that's consistent, and even in their own business models. Is one is very decidedly more SMB, lower end of the mid market, and the other is, I mean, will sell SMB, but is more mid market to enterprise to what I call global galactic, right? The biggest, the largest of the businesses in the world.
Right. And Mike, what about like emails, LinkedIn, calling? You mentioned like, hey, sequences need to be 10 to 12 touch points, not 2 to 3. Walk us through some of the things which have given you success in terms of sequences, in terms of channels.
Yeah. So LinkedIn and email are are still the best channels, but well, with phone, right? I think people forget you could still call people on the phone. The phone works,
Right.
right? Especially if you do it in conjunction with email or in conjunction with LinkedIn, and tell people I'm going to call you, and then you do. Like, you can't tell people you're going to call them and not call them. By the way, don't do that. Things that we've seen that work really, really well. One is, again, having a cadence that's personalized, short communications, right? So, and I learned this years ago. I don't remember who taught me. If you're sending somebody an email,
Mhm.
especially on an outbound, and they have to scroll more than once on a phone, it's too long. So you really want it to fit on one screen. So get right to the point of why. Don't try to be cute and funny about it, because people can't detect tone in email, so they don't know if you're being funny or if you're being sarcastic or maybe if you're like actually being offensive. So just get to the point. Do not use LinkedIn to sell if you haven't set the stage yet for you to do that. Meaning, don't connect with somebody and then your first communication is to try to sell them. And you can learn a lot. Again, back to the 3x3 research, you can use LinkedIn to sell if you've done the research, so that when you connect with the person or you send that first communication, you can say, here's why I want to talk to you, and be very specific and intentional about it. And it works. We've used consistently, and this really works, email in the sales process. Once you're in the process itself, post demo, proposal stage kind of thing, an email from your CEO or CRO to the economic buyer, saying thanking them, complimenting the team, reiterating the business problem that you're solving, and asking for time. If you send that email during your sales process and you get no response, or you get told, no, thank you, I don't want to meet with you, your win rates, you'll see it correlates with the win rates. Your win rates are very, very low in those situations, because if you're asking somebody to commit $30,000 a year over 3 years, call it $100,000 commitment, and the economic buyer does not respond or will not spend time with your CEO or CRO, they're not buying from you.
Right. That's an interesting insight. Quick question, right? Let's say there's a band qualified, and band being budget, authority, need, and timing, right?
Yeah.
A band qualified sales accepted lead, SAL, SQL.
Yeah.
What is a good conversion ratio of SQL to close one?
So yeah, I see that this got asked also in the chat. So first of all, I do want to say I'm not at all a believer in BANT. In fact, I think BANT needs to be stopped, because it doesn't actually get you a qualified opportunity. Budget probably being the number. Like, my teams don't ask budget, because if I ask you your budget, you're either going to say I can't tell you, or you're going to give me a number that's not accurate, because you're afraid if I tell you it's $100,000, oh, you're going to tell me that your solution's $100,000.
Exactly.
But if if I've diagnosed the business problem properly, and I have have confirmed that there's a senior executive that is championing this project, that has told you to go fix the problem, the budget is there. It may not be obvious. What we're seeing, conversion rates generally around 30% SQL to or MQL to SQL. I have a client I'm working with right now that we're pushing it to 50%, maybe even 60%. Unfortunately, I think that the waterfall, if you will, still remains in that the MQL to close is still like 1 in 7, 1 in 8, which
Right.
is now, and again, you can push that higher. And
Right.
we did push it higher at my last long-term corporate job. And what we were seeing was our close rates were like 40% of qualified. So once we
Right.
got into the demo phase, those deals closed at about a 40% rate because of the way we were qualifying and doing discovery.
Right. So you're saying just on that. So you're saying MQL to SQL is 30 to 50%, and then SQL to close one will be anywhere between, let's say, 20, 25 to 40 on the higher end.
Yeah. So yeah, 20% is probably on the lower end.
Right.
I've seen as low as 17%, Karen, to be honest. And by the way, that's also kind of acceptable in some businesses, and I won't get into that right now.
Right.
But like when you look at any of the studies right now, whether Salesforce does one every year, Insight Sales does one, the world-class close rates are like 25 to 28%. Which, by the way, to give you an idea of how different that is, if I go back 30 years in my career and your close rate was 25%, you were not going to keep your job.
Wow.
Not. So it does go to retraining and rethinking how we qualify, how we do discovery, and
Right.
being involved in deals where we're a fit and we can actually solve the problem, where we have an understanding and access to the people who are making the decision and this is another thing that we've learned in the process, and can release the funds.
Right.
So one of the things that's changed is we have our decision maker and our economic buyer, but now there's a third persona or group, which is the person or the people who release the funds.
Right. And Mike, we're coming towards the end,
Yeah.
but a couple of questions for you, right? One is you keep talking about how you qualify makes a big difference to success.
Yeah.
How do you qualify?
So we developed a number of years ago what we call the 4W questions.
Okay.
What happened, which is the catalyst, right? It is not the business problem. It's Karen went to Mike and said, hey, we have this problem. It's a big problem. It's untenable or heading to untenable. And if you don't fix it, Mike, something bad's going to happen to you. That's a catalyst. We want to know what that is, because nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today is the day I'm calling Karen, I'm buying Sprouts. That is not how it works in B2B sales.
Right.
So you have to know what the catalyst is. The second thing is why, right? Which is that's the business problem. Why are we talking at all? Because whatever is happening has been going on for a while. The business problem existed before you spoke to them, or before they reached out to you or accepted your cold call. Mm-hmm. You want to understand what that is. Next thing is, who owns the project? So back to that budget question, who's the senior executive who is responsible for making sure that this gets fixed? And the last thing is, when do you need to be in production? Not when are you buying, but when do you need to be in production? And if there's a date or an approximate date, now you also know that there's budget. And you can ask, what's magical about that date? What happens if you miss that date? And that conversation, by the way, qualification conversation, is a separate and distinct meeting. It's not, I'm going to do qualification, quick discovery, boom, I'm going to do a demo.
Right.
It's qualification, then a discovery meeting, then a demo. Now, sometimes in transactional sales, you collapse that.
Right.
But each of those steps needs to be intentional, or you're going to end up with that 1 in 8 close rate instead of getting more to like 40 or 50%. Which is you can get there.
This is great. I think this is a good way to probably just come to a closure. Just one last thing, Mike.
Yes.
This current company, you said we went to 50 to 60% in MQL to SQL.
Yeah.
What did you do differently? Was it just this qualification mechanism or something else?
So the something different is being, again, I'll use the word intentional, being very intentional about the problem that we solve and who we're communicating to. So the problem that we're solving is decisioning information for executives. Right. So for us to communicate to anyone under a SVP or C level
Mhm.
is a mess.
Right.
And we're communicating in a way that we know that businesses have the problem.
Right. All right. Great. Thank you so much. This was a fun session.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
look forward to keeping in touch.
Likewise. And
Thank,
people
thank,
can find me anytime.
yep. You're the only Mike Muhlfelder.
Yeah. And it's Calm Motion Sales, by the way. So you
Right.
can find me there too.
Great.
All
Thanks,
right.
Mike.
Thank you.